I suppose our mill is just like any other converted old building nowadays, with all modern conveniences for the residents. But we provide free board for the early birds too. Those are our windows on the ground floor, and that's the old corn mill, which now has a wood store upstairs. That's where the swallows nest in summer, but that's a long way off yet. On this cold, bare March morning, the tree creeper can still have a long search for his breakfast. He's got something there. The old mill stream is blocked up now, but the Glencorse burn, as we call it, still runs past. We've a new bridge over it since last winter, a giant poplar felled by a December gale. But there's no holding back the rising sap, and the growing force of spring even brings out the buds on the fallen giant, a symbol of life out of death. Then comes April and the first green, and we start to think of summer visitors, the birds which are sensible enough to wait till the first warm days, perhaps even May, and the hatch of insects. But where are the sweet fleet swallows all this time, the feeders on flying insects, whose home is the sky? They've been on their way for weeks, flying 6,500 miles from South Africa, homing gradually back to our mill. What a fantastic sense of direction. Yes, it's been a long journey, but mind you, it's no wonder they do come back, because everything's just right for them here. A nice place to nest in, that wood store upstairs, and friendly neighbours who are always glad to hear their cheerful song again. I don't suppose many people notice that the male swallows are back first. The cock usually arrives about a week before his mate. You see, he's got to stake a claim on the future nest site. And isn't this just ideal? It's dark and dry, and there are lots of rafters to choose from for a nest support. Yes, thank you. This'll do very nicely. Of course, my wife and I aren't the only people living in the mill, and the swallows aren't the only birds that make use of our buildings. There's a great tit nesting in that drain pipe. And see that window in the tool shed down there? The robin seems to be interested. The broken pane explains it, just the kind of place that robins like. In fact, it seems to be pretty popular with the blackbirds too. And the wren. The wren's a cunning one. He's making use of two old houses, ours and the swallow's old nest of last year too. The swallows are a long way behind the residents, but they're making progress. At least he's found a wife now. Funny how some people seem to prefer ITV to BBC, isn't it? But it does make a better perch. If his mate of last year has survived the 13,000 miles of migration journeys, it's almost certain to be the same bird that he's courting there now, this year. They don't display much, but he sings, and makes charming little advances to his mate. And in no time, he's introducing her to the home that he's already chosen. Their first essential is a clear flyway in and out. The wood store is ideal. You see, there's no glass in the windows, and the shutters are always open to let the air in to season the wood. And if she's hesitant about accepting the place, he soon shows her the way in, and even sits on the actual spot that he's chosen for the nest. Come on then, what are you worried about? It's just right. There's a good support for the nest, it's right under the warm roof, and it's well out of the reach of the cats. Yes, I think she likes it. And so she should, as it's very conveniently placed for a good supply of wet mud for nest building, down by the edge of the stream, just down there by the fishing notice, where the cattle come to drink and keep the mud churned up with their feet. Besides, there's no time now to cast about for a better place. The season is pressing on, and time waits for neither man nor swallow. Of course, it means a great many journeys, with only one beakful of mud at a time. But it's not too far, and in a couple of days, there are the beginnings of a nest. They place each mud pellet very carefully in position, with a vigorous use of the tongue. Both birds share the task of building, but you'll notice they only build in sunshine. Instinctively they know only to add more mud when conditions are good for drying, and on a wet day works at a standstill. Even on a good day like this, they never build for more than half an hour or so, and this gives the last lot of mud a chance to dry before they add any more. Well, it would be asking for trouble to add too much of that heavy wet mud at a time, wouldn't it? Watch the way they use their tongue to settle the mud into place. It's a good engineering practice, that, just like a concrete vibrator, settling in cement. The swallows aren't the only birds building just now. There's a sand martin, and he's heading for his nest in a sandbank downstream. Sand martins live in a colony and excavate their nests out of the sand by scratching a way in with their tiny feet. She's only just started her nest hole. Time for us to pay the swallows a visit at dawn, before the tawny owl has finished his night's work and gone to bed. All night, the hen swallow has roosted on the rim of the nest. At about 4:30 we find her settling down to lay her third egg. Soon her labour starts, a rhythmical contraction of her muscles, as she squeezes the egg down the oviduct. She presses down, relaxes, presses, relaxes. Then a brief moment of final tension, and there, can you see the egg actually appearing under her tail while she sits panting from her exertions? Well, after all, laying an egg is a rather exhausting business. The sand martins have been sitting on eggs for a week or two now, and there's always plenty of noise and excitement at their colony. The off-duty birds seem to like flying in formation, for all the world like a squadron of jet fighters. Like the swallows, the sand martins sit in the dark, each in a little nest chamber at the end of the burrow, with the entrance their only window on the world. The swallows nest in a different setting, but it's just the same situation, with the same patient job to be done for 15 long days until the eggs hatch. And at night her mate comes in to roost on the next rafter, waiting for us to switch out our lights and leave them in peace. Of course, the resident birds that were with us all winter are mostly feeding now, like the robin, who still takes food from the windowsill, though white bread is probably not at all a suitable food for her nestlings. The great tit's much more sensible and prefers a good protein diet for his offspring rather than these modern processed foods. And what about our little bird slum in the tool shed? The hen blackbird's still using the communal entrance to feed her brood. And there's a pair of starlings up above, nesting under the slates. And they're all busy trying to satisfy the insatiable appetites of their nestlings. There's plenty of food to go round at this time, though it seems rather a drain on the great tit's resources. Yes, it does seem to be a bit overcrowded down there just now. Better wait till later, I think. Anyway, it's nice to see that that robin has learnt a bit of sense about dietetics at last. One day in June, the swallow's quiet life suddenly changes. Within about 48 hours, the first 4 eggs have hatched, and the last chick has just split open the shell and struggled out into the nest. The eggshells are either heaved over the edge or carried right away and dropped in the garden outside. The young are naked and blind and very ugly, and for the first day they eat virtually nothing. It's difficult at this stage to imagine how these tiny featherless things will ever come to resemble their parents with their controlled high-speed flight. All they need is food, and this the parents carry back in their throats. Hundreds and hundreds of flying insects, all caught individually on the wing, and brought back, many of them still alive, to the nest. Both parents are kept busy, for though at first the chicks are only just strong enough to raise their heads and beg for food, they will soon double their own weight several times over. Until they grow their feathers, the young are brooded much of the time, and at dusk the hen will settle down to spend the night on the nest, while her mate goes to roost after his long, tiring day in his usual place next door. What a change takes place in the next 2 short weeks. I wonder how many thousands of insects have been brought back and converted into flesh and feather before this stage where the quill cases on the wings first start to blossom out into flight feathers. With throats bulging and mouths crammed, the adults ply back and forth from dawn to dusk to keep these noisy orange gapes from shrieking their continual demand. The parents always insist on keeping the nest clean, and still attempt to brood the growing family. Most of the food is now larger flying insects, gnats and mosquitoes and flies, but towards dusk they may suddenly find a new source of supply, such as a flight of swift moths, where each insect means a separate journey, but also a complete mouthful. And always they wait to remove the droppings from the nest when they depart. As long as the young beg and there's light enough to feed by, they'll bring in food for the family. Well, it's getting late now, and in the failing light, the tawny owl is out looking for food for his own brood, and comes to perch in the tree just below the swallow's window. He misses nothing, but the swallows haven't seen him yet, and the owl watches every movement as they fly overhead. And then, suddenly, they're aware of danger, and launch into the attack. Flustered from his perch, the owl makes the mistake of flying up onto the fence beside the mill. But perhaps he knows that the swallow's attack is mostly threat, with little real danger, except to his dignity. The owl's passive resistance rather blunts the edge of the swallow's aggressiveness, and they return to the nest for a breather. But as soon as he moves again and flies up to the top of the garden clothes pole, which is visible from the swallow's nest in the rafters, this is too much for them, and again they dive to the attack. So June passes into July, and all over Britain the swallows rear their first broods, and then, undaunted, start the weary cycle all over again. Let's drop in now at an old mill in Suffolk, where clematis and hollyhock glow in the morning sun. We've some good friends here, and they're fond of the birds too. That's the old nun pigeon, who likes to wait on the windowsill for a chance to slip inside and admire herself in the bedroom mirror before the lady of the house can return to chase her out. Well, here's an ideal place for swallows. Old buildings and plenty of insects over the water, a bridge over the mill stream, and a flyway in and out of the old wheelhouse at both sides. On a beam over the mill race, a brood of 5 young swallows are almost fully fledged. At this stage we see the necessity for sound nest construction in the early stages. All day the parents have been hard at it, with scarcely time to sit and preen or talk to the neighbours. Now, at dusk, after a last feed, they go in to roost, sitting just behind the lamps, which we have to use to light up the nest as before. But the swallows are quite unafraid of our presence. There's a softness in the air on a lazy summer day in the old mill garden, a softness that fits with Suffolk and sunshine and swallows. The budgerigar likes to be out in the sunshine, and he's quite happy confined in his one little corner. After all, he's never known anything else. Nor, for that matter, have the young swallows yet, caged not by wire, but by their dependence on their parents. But they've all the right instincts. Watch how they follow the flies buzzing in our lamps. One day they will have to learn to catch them for themselves on the wing. And that day's not far off now. It's getting overcrowded, and the nest is not a very safe place to experiment. And in fact, they're really ready to go now. At this stage, the parents seem to spend more time perching near the nest. Could it be that she's trying to call them off? They've got to take the plunge sometime, though not, we hope, too literally in this situation. Perhaps her own flights from the nest really are meant to encourage them. After all, the sky is their real home, and not a dark corner amongst the cobwebs. But I wonder how they finally make up their minds to come out into this world of freedom and colour and movement. For the time does come, and they're off, flying like experts right from the start, and leaving behind an empty nursery. They don't go far, the first flight, just to the barbed wire stretched across the mill pool. But they've at least made a start into a life of freedom and adventure and risk. Unlike the poor old budgerigar, who's still as dependent as ever on us, but really much happier that way. In no time, the young swallows are up to a higher perch in the birch tree, well out of harm's way. And for the first few weeks, until they're much stronger on the wing, they will still depend on their parents. At first they just sit and shriek to be fed, and he who shrieks loudest tends to be fed first. They watch every movement overhead that could possibly mean food. and the adults seem quite tired at this stage, catching enough for themselves and 4 or 5 young by these constant high-speed forays over the Suffolk cornfields and down the green hedgerows. But it's a non-stop kind of life. It's a typical family, too, with all the usual rivalries and squabbles. Do you see the way the young are perched? But if you watch, you'll see that there seems to be a distinct advantage in choosing one of the higher places on the branch. It's just too easy to be bypassed if you're too low down in the world. It looks as though the greedy ones always come off best. But wait for it. Patience has its rewards, and there does seem to be some justice in the way the parents feed the family, beyond the elementary laws of demand and supply. Of course, if they get hungry enough, they can soon go to meet the parents and take the food from them in mid-air, which is all good practice for the future. Back at our own mill in Scotland, they're getting plenty of practice, as the young birds of many families gather together on the wires. There are first broods now strong on the wing, and second broods still learning, but all practicing and preparing and waiting. You can always tell the young birds of the year on the wing by their shorter tails, without the long tail streamers of their parents. They love to play, and like all play, these aerial chases have a serious purpose, for down by the stream there are the first visible signs of the shortening day and the failing year, and the threat of cold autumn nights soon to come. To this, the swallows have their instinctive answer, but they still linger on, preparing their plumage for the journey as they preen on a wind-frayed branch of sycamore. When the autumn colours turn the whole landscape brown, there are many who cannot migrate, and who must face the problem of winter as nature has taught them. The hedgehog. He remembers that dry bed of leaves that gave him frost-free shelter for last winter's long sleep. The only snag is that that was far off in the wood, across the other side of the stream. Still, a little bit of running water is really nothing to daunt a determined hedgehog. Birds like our grey wagtails will soon disperse, but not very far. Their young are now full grown and ready to face any journey. The pied wagtails will stay with us for some time yet, but these grey-backed juveniles are also ready to disperse away from their breeding grounds. In the fall of the year, many migrants have to reach their moment of decision. And among our swallows, there's a growing restlessness, an atmosphere of tension. There are communal drinking in the stream and excited feeding forays. and are reaching up to the highest perches, as though they were looking for the way to go, and were only held back by the slender threads of familiarity and a fear of the unknown. They gather in larger and larger assemblies. The noise and the excitement and the last-minute preening all express the same urge, the urge to be off and away and south on the great trek. For 4 months they have taken all we had to offer in food and shelter, and they've given us the pleasure of their cheerful company round our homes. Now, feeding as they go, they move steadily south over our autumn landscape. Soon they will face all the hazards of wind and weather, of desert and mountain and strange seas, as they are drawn by the greatest force in their lives, back to the safety of their winter quarters and the promise of another year.